Hi Phil, why are we at Plympton today?
This is PLYMPTON Castle. In the Civil War, the Royalists often based themselves here. Early in the war, Sir Rolf Hopton was in this area, and then later on, Colonel John Digby based his units here when he was blockading Plymouth. Plymouth wasn't always under close siege. Only 2 or 3 times during the Civil War did it come under close siege. The rest of the time it was blockaded.
Phil, what's a close siege?
It means they were closer to Plymouth. The Royalist armies under Prince Maurice, Richard Grenville and King Charles, in the 4 years of fighting, they were able, with substantial numbers of troops, to move north of Plymouth and really hem the city, hem the town in. The rest of the time, the troops were gone. There were only a few thousand troops in this whole area, so the Royalists did not have enough men to man the outer works that were always north of Plymouth, their main works. So they abandoned those and came east of the Plym. That way they could disperse their units. A strong force here, Plymstock, Widey, Crown Hill, St Budo, all those areas had detachments of cavalry and infantry, and they were able to watch for any excursions from Plymouth. They weren't strong enough to blockade Plymouth, to closely besiege Plymouth. So this was a Royalist area in the Civil War. Plympton was mainly Royalist. There were soldiers from here who fought for the king, but the Plym between them, they felt quite safe here, that the men from Plymouth would not be able to make attacks against them. This wasn't always the case. Now, in 1644, Sir Richard Grenville came to Plymouth in March to assume command of the Royalist forces. He based himself at Fitchford and began raising troops from Cornwall and North Devon and the rest of the area around this part of the country to build a significant army to attack Plymouth and hopefully take the city. Colonel John Digby retained command in this area of the troops closer to Plymouth. Now, he based himself here, and down below in the Inner Bailey, his troops were camped. His soldiers were camped in and around the castle's Inner Bailey. They had horses here, there was cannons here, there was ammunition stored here. Food supplies were brought in from the South Hams. But Colonel Digby used this area as his base, if you like. Now, they thought they
would have been just down there?
Yeah, that's the Inner Bailey of the castle. That's the sort of where a lot of the work went on. That part. There would be houses, there'd be buildings, there'd be tents. Wooden lean-tos, not stone buildings mainly, but cannon parks. There was an artillery park down there somewhere. They found cannonballs here from the Civil War and musket balls.
What a sight to see.
Yeah, and you can see Lyra from here. And if these trees were probably gone, they weren't here, so you could probably see
there.
Yep.
And we can see around to Efford.
Yes.
There.
Crown Hill's over there, Liam's over there.
Quite a view, isn't it?
It is. So you can see why they based themselves here. They were close enough to Plymouth, but further enough away not to be attacked by the men from Plymouth. Because the parliamentarians in Plymouth were well known for raiding. When the Royalists had moved away from Plymouth, the first thing they needed to get out and find food, supplies, fresh horses, get some air. So one of the most, you think being here, nothing happened, but there were raids. Like I said, when Grenville came here, Digby retained command here of the Royalists east of the Plym. Now, his men would go out and raid known parliamentarian houses for food, for horses, for hay, for whatever they needed, and this news got back to Plymouth. In June 1644, Colonel James Kerr came to Plymouth to take command. He relieved Colonel Martin, who took over command of the town after Colonel William Gould died in March 1644. Kerr was a stronger character. He was a Scotsman. He came to Plymouth. He reviewed his troops on June the 18th at Lipson. He reviewed his troops, set them all out like you would do, like any army does. They always have a review. Flags flying, horses riding by, cannons firing. And 6 days later, he heard news that these Royalists here were making raids and stealing from parliamentary houses. So he sent a detachment of horse out, and they rode out and they wanted to surprise the Royalists here. So he sent them to Shaw, all the way out to Shaw, to bypass in that direction. Yeah. Shoal Bridge. He sent them out that way to come in and surprise the Royalists by hitting them from a side they didn't expect. The Royalists were always looking that way because that's where they thought they attacked, towards Longbridge and Saltram.
Plym, and
Yeah.
then this town,
Yeah,
expecting it to come this way.
yeah, but it didn't. So
So
we
they
had a lot of
actually
strong
came-
guards down there.
They came, which way did they
They
come?
came down from the north and hit Plympton.
Which is this way.
That direction, I think, yeah.
That-
They
yes.
came over the moors, came down, hit Plympton, rustled some cattle, captured a lieutenant, and then decided they'd done enough to frighten the Royalists and rode back to Plymouth via Longbridge. Now, the Royalists were quite strong here, so they sent a detachment in pursuit. There was fighting near Longbridge, up near Hopton's Work, which is near Crown Hill, Widey. The Royalists, the Roundheads were beginning to sort of panic because the Royalists were quite strong there. They got detachments from other places to meet them, and they were chasing the Roundhead cavalry. Now, near Hopton's Work, the Roundheads came upon a body of their own musketeers lining a hedge. These fired at the Royalists, but their own men panicked and rode through the musketeers, sort of disorganising their lines. The Roundheads decided to try and run for it, but they changed their minds. After a big clash in the middle between musketeers, cavalry from both sides, two captains, Haynes and Barnes, were captured, two Roundhead captains, and one, Gosnell, was wounded. It didn't mention, I've not read any troops that were killed, but there were. The Royalists regained their composure and counterattacked the Royalists somewhere north of Plymouth, where Blindman's Wood, that area, Manamead. There was a severe fight, and a man called a cornet called Burchell actually wounded Colonel John Digby in the face, damaging one of his eyes, and he was actually put out of action for a few months after that. So the Royalist commander, Colonel Digby, was in the pursuit. He must have led his troops after the Roundheads who raided Plympton. Digby was knocked out of the fight. His men were pushed back. Another man who was wounded was Colonel John Arundel, who was the governor of Pendennis Castle's son. He was badly wounded by a man called Captain William Braddon, who was quite a popular character in the Plymouth garrison before the war, or during the war and after the war. Braddon helped his wounded opponent back to Magdalen Fort, where he died. Such were the times that they gave the body back to the Royalists for their own interment of this brave colonel. His sword was presented to the town, and that's what happened here in Plympton.
Interesting to hear what happened at these places that we know so well today.
Yes.
They ring a bell, it comes home, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's our story.
It is.
It's our history, isn't it?
Yeah, and you wouldn't think it
belongs
now.
to Plymouth.
It does.
Phil, once again, very, very many thanks.
All right, Steve.